Hello and welcome to State of the Project Meros, and this is the June edition, June 2021. I say that because we have a very special milestone coming up, but we should talk about that in a moment. So, State of the Project Meros is a podcast where we look at the project known as Meros, the development, what's happening in the code base, and we speak to generally the lead developer, a man known by who goes by the name of Kayaba. Kayaba is with me today as always. So Kayaba, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for asking. Always appreciate it.
Yes, and I really mean it. I'm going to ask you how well you are because I am doing terribly. I'm suffering with some sort of cold. Um, I don't believe it's COVID related because we don't really get COVID in the United Kingdom. I don't believe that's true. So I'll throw that out there. So we've got loads and loads and loads to get through. Whilst doing the research for this particular month, I was extremely pleased with all of the development that I saw on the GitHub. So well done, Kayaba. I'll give you a
Thank you.
small round of applause there for that. And let's get started. First things first. Meros' third birthday. There was actually a commit for that. It was um, unusually light on documentation, uh, but Meros' third birthday. How does it feel to have Meros as a 3-year-old now? And I wanted to ask you, what was the single best piece of code that you believe you've added, whether or not it still exists in the code base or not? And by the way, sorry for my constant sniffing.
No, it's all good. You're sick. You can't control it. I'm here for you. Um, so I kind of just added that commit because I wanted to do something, and I felt it was kind of sweet and charming to put it in the code base, even if it was unprofessional. I could have attached a letter to it, but I decided just to, leave it as is, kind of simple. I meant to have an exclamation mark there. If you look, there's no punctuation, and I think there is a comma, but there's no like period, exclamation mark. And if you look at my Git commits, I do use punctuation. I'll use periods, and that's because when I was writing out the commit, my terminal thought that the exclamation mark was a control character, like I was telling it to do something, not just writing an exclamation mark. And when I fixed it, I didn't realize that I excluded it in my fix. So I kind of feel bad about that. But I'm like, I already did this. I'm not going to force push out a different commit that's corrected, and I just accepted it. Kind of feel bad about that though. Um,
Does it feel like you've kind of said happy birthday, Meros, for a third birthday without smiling or without yelling? Is it kind of like, happy birthday? I don't really
I
care.
just
There's no
it kind of
explanation.
irked me that there's no punctuation. I just like using punctuation and being proper about it. Even though people using Git generally don't use punctuation, and I'm not trying to say they're improper. That's just the way it generally goes. I personally prefer one way. Industry seems to be against me there.
Yeah. Well, what does
Um,
the industry know? So your
but
favorite piece of code in the code base or previous?
that is just really hard to say. Really hard to say. And I was thinking it over. Um, I kind of have like three things at the top of my head. One of them would be our Ristretto implementation. It's the first one that I know of in Python, and by in Python I just mean in Python at all. I don't know of anyone else who wrote a library for it, wrote an implementation for it, provided Python bindings to it, so on. As far as I know, we just have the first, and it's actually something I've been looking into making its own library because as of right now, it's part of the Meros project code base because it's used in our tests. So it's a library there. And it's actually something I've debated outsourcing on the pure premise of making it more accessible to other people who need this. And that's just something I'm proud of, not because it's in Python. I really dislike Python for a lot of reasons, but it's something I'm proud of because it's um, just quality cryptography. I am proud of myself for doing it. I think we did a good job with it. I think it highlights the proper way to write such libraries. Cryptography libraries are a real mixed bag. My favorite one out there is this one known as Dalek. Dalek. I
Dalek?
don't watch Doctor Who. I don't know the proper pronunciation. Um, Dalek. Uh, So it's in Rust, and that's one of the reasons I appreciate it. But they also just have a really nice API where you can actually use the plus symbol, multiplication, subtraction, so on. Because a lot of cryptography libraries from like years ago, notably with ED25519, which is what we were using, they instead have very obtuse functions where part of it's just because of the language. If you're writing in C, you don't have access to the addition operator. You can't define custom addition. But some of it is just very obtuse because they only write code as needed. If you look at classic ED25519 libraries, they say, okay, we need to implement signature, sign and verify. We're going to write code for exactly that and then nothing else. And because of that, you have to, I think one version of Meros, in order to add 2 points together, it called 5 different functions because it had to serialize a data point. It converted a piece of data to just bytes, just like network bytes, something that you would send around. Then it parsed it back into a different data type because we needed it in a different format. But the only parse function took the negative form of it. So then we had to serialize it again and then parse it back again just to get a positive form of it, like the correctly signed, the positive form of it in a different data type that we could then do the actual operation with. Like, it's just so obtuse. And so I just really like the Python Ristretto code. I think I did a good job with it.
What about sketches? Where are the sketches?
That was something else I debated bringing up, our pin sketch implementation. Not really something I'm the most proud of. Generally, when I write these implementations, not only am I trying to get a second point of reference on it, but I'm also trying to get a personal understanding of it. And I want to make sure I know how it works. I understand how it's used, deepen my understanding, and so on, because that makes me competent enough to actually use the code. I still have no idea how pin sketch works. I have no clue. All I know is I took mini sketch and I wrote the Python equivalent of it. But I don't feel I did a lot of original development there. There's some Python specific code, but it's really more of the C++ project carried over. It's not special, but I did consider that. The second thing I was considering was our BLS code. We implemented a BLS standard. It's not just BLS, it's a standard in general when dealing with cryptography called hash to curve, and we implemented the BLS form of it. Yet we did a very generic job because I was looking at the spec, and the spec says, here's a bunch of generic functions. So I did a very generic version of it, and I'm really proud of how that turned out. In fact, I was planning on moving the Ristretto code over just because it would fit in there nicely. We already have some duplicated code if you compare the two. The reason I didn't do that in the first place is I forgot I had written that code. So I wrote my own version of the relevant parts. um, but no, they share a lot of common code, so it would definitely be good to move over. But really, I think for my top spot, I'm going to pick ASMR or Atomic Swap library, or not library, but program, proof of concept.
Yeah,
I mean, unless I can pick all of Meros, but I feel like that's kind of cheating.
that is definitely cheating. That is definitely cheating. I guess ASMR is probably a good pick. I honestly thought you would have gone with sketches because that seemed to be the one that you was the most excited about or the most
I am very
animated.
excited about it. I just don't consider it part of Meros versus something Meros uses.
Right. Okay. That's fair. That's fair. That's fair.
But no, ASMR, it has strong cryptography. It was the first to implement. It uses a new protocol, which is very exciting. There's a lot of really good things about ASMR that I like about it. It's in Rust. It's very clean code. I still think it's some of the cleanest atomic swap code out there. So yeah,
Okay. I want to get into all the commits and all the issues. There's so much to go through. I'm hoping we can squeeze it all in. So let's give it a shot, shall we? Again,
sure.
apologies for my snottiness. Mac OS support,
It's
which
okay. You've
was,
been a jerk to me for a while.
yeah, I know. It's
So
Mac OS support commit number 314. This
oh,
seems
definitely not
exciting.
commit number. I think we are approaching 2,000 of those.
Yeah. All right.
I think
Okay.
that would be
Well,
the
that's
issue.
right. Okay. Okay. Because I was going to ask you that because I saw the number in there and I had assumed, and then I thought, no, that can't be that. What could it be? Okay, so maybe there
Oh
was an
no,
issue
it's
that Mac.
the pull request for it because I merged it via a pull request.
Right. So, This Mac support, sorry, this Mac OS support. Tell us about it. It did seem like quite a lot of changed lines and more of a repair than a
Mhm.
brand new feature. So tell us about Mac OS support.
So I did pull it up, and this was actually part of a platform support branch. It was really important to me to have a strong for Meros to be available from a development perspective on macOS and Windows. I think some Bitcoin forks and other projects, they basically just said Linux only. If you want to develop this project, you have to get on Linux. And if you need a Windows or macOS build, you can cross compile, and that is not a stance I agree with. But while working on this, um, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So I recently actually got one of the new M1 Macs, which I've actually been pretty impressed with. I still dislike Apple as a company, but their hardware, the recent M1 Macs are especially great. Um, even
Well,
if they are
sorry, sorry
historically
to
very
sorry
overpriced.
sorry sorry to cut you there, Kaya. But
No, go ahead.
are you allowed to really dislike a company but yet still like their products? Is that
I like
okay?
one of their products. One
Well,
of their products.
yes. Are you allowed to like any of their products if you really dislike the company? Is that okay?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think there are historical examples of negative effects or negative overall groups with positive things. One of the things I want to note is I am going to be very embarrassed if I get this wrong. And you may or may not know, but the South American leader who revolutionized education in his country, I believe it was Castro.
Yeah.
And this actually came up in the American political cycle because I think Bernie Sanders appreciated the education reforms. And a lot of people said that he was a Castro fan and trying to slander him over it when he called out a very specific aspect, the education reform. And I think it is possible for negative groups or groups perceived as negative to still have other aspects that are positive or perceived as positive.
Okay. So, as you were saying about this Apple Mac that you got when you
Mm-hmm.
decided that you was going to sell your soul and buy an M1. So,
Yeah, no, I've liked it so far. Really, with the battery life and then just the performance has also been good for what it is. Still a bit overpriced, but yeah.
yeah,
Now
it
that
is.
they're using their own chips, I think it's more justified
Okay.
just because of the development cost. Um, so really got to work on getting Meros to fully be on it, from the primary node with working without issues to running all the tests to running all the Python tests, just everything. If you wanted to develop on Meros, this is how you would do it. And there are a few blockers. Choose nim, which is how we install nim. That does not work on M1 Max. It doesn't look on any ARM platform, as far as I know, actually. So I had to manually build it, and I did open an issue with ShoesNim saying even if you guys don't want to support like ARM MacBooks, you should grab the Intel macOS binaries because M1 Max will run old Intel code, like x86 code, through something called Rosetta. So I'm like, you can still get NIM on this. You just have to use the version that you're not expected to. And it won't be optimal, but it will work without issue. And I even commented, like, if you want, you guys could print out a warning, like, hey, we don't support M1 Max, but but we can still get you NIM. It was a thing, but I opened the issue. That unfortunately has gone uncommented and unresolved so far. Um, there
After
was,
how long though? How long ago did you put that?
it's been a few weeks.
Okay.
Another thing, random X, the hashing algorithm we use for proof of work, that did not work on M1 MacBooks. It would crash in some way. The benchmark would have a bus error, and then my code was having a seg fault. And the reason for that is the just-in-time compilation they have, where they actually generate assembly code out of random X programs to speed up it. So instead of like saying, "Oh, let me check what this is, let me execute this code," they say, okay, I'm going to take this code and generate literal machine code to do exactly this. In the moment, I'm going to generate a brand new program that's going to be highly optimized at doing this. And it's great. It did not work on M1 MacBooks, but they still suggested you use it. There's this function to get the default flags, like suggestions for how to handle it. And it did suggest using the just-in-time compiler, but if you did, it would crash. So we either had to check if we were on M1 Mac and disable it, or try to get the upstream, like the actual RandomX library fixed in this instance. So I went to the issue. I'm like, hey, I'm looking into this. What's the update? This issue's been open a few months. And they said, if you try this, it should work. Did not work. And then they said, oh, it's actually this one. And that one did work, and it did eventually get merged. So now RandomX just works on M1 Max. So I'd like to think I was somewhat responsible for that, but in reality, the fix had been sitting alone for a few months now, maybe 6 months even, and it really just needed someone to say, hey, just someone to say, this works, can we please merge it?
Yeah.
Then there was just some other things, like this one function wasn't working properly. There is a limit to how many networking sockets you can open on Linux and macOS. So if you want to have connections to other people, there's a limit to how many you can have. And we keep track of that because we don't want to be in a situation where that's completely full. We always want to keep at least a few open. And if we're approaching our limit, we'll say, hey, we're busy. Please connect to busy. We can't handle more connections right now. And on macOS, it always said we have 10 open sockets. And you could point out that there were more than 10 open, and it would be like, nope, you have 10.
I remember
and
this.
I don't know why. Because the way you check is there's a directory, and it's a special directory known as devfd, /dev/fd. That's the path for it. It's 2 folders, folder of dev and then the subfolder of fd. And you just get the list of files in it, and that's how many open sockets you have. It's technically a bit different than that. It's something about file handles, and not all file handles, but that's the basic premise. And in this basic premise, we were calling just like, hey, can we just get a list of all these files? And I'm not sure if the issue was with NIM or it has to be something with how NIM was doing it. Like NIM was just getting the file list in a way where it would say, here's 1 through 10, and then it would stop doing it. And this issue does not exist on Linux, and I don't know why it exists. As far as I know, it should be without issue. That said, it did exist. So what I actually ended up doing is I used a tool called ls, which stands for, I'm actually not sure. Like, I always considered it list files, and ls isn't list, but I'm actually not sure. So Meros now actually executes the ls command to get a list, like to actually list all the files, and then it counts from that. And that's really not optimal, because we actually have to spawn a terminal to do it. And it's not like there's random input in there or user input or anything that could lead to Meros executing random commands. Don't get me wrong. But it's really not optimal, and I don't like it. But it's the only fix I had. So the good news is we fixed it. The bad news is I'm not happy with the fix, but that's something to tackle another day.
Yeah. So I guess once you've got support, then you can start ironing out those imperfections.
Yeah, and there were a few other missed issues. Our Python test wouldn't run because we had a folder named pylint, which is a folder of files related to the program pylint. But macOS doesn't have a case-sensitive file system. So we named ours capital P pylint, and the actual is lowercase pylint. And I never even thought this would be an issue, because on Linux, it said, oh, you're looking for capital P pylint, let me get you this, and it just works. But on macOS, it says, oh, you're looking for pylint, lowercase or capital P. And because of that, it went to the actual pylint. It was a whole thing. And I just never thought that was an issue, just because I'm like, oh, I have pylint files, let me name the folder pylint. And it just never thought it would be an issue, but it was. So that was also something that took me a few minutes to resolve. But really, there's just a list of mischanges. I could really go on and on. But in the end, we now support macOS without issue.
Perfect.
And Windows support is also planned, but I have taken a break for a few days, or maybe weeks, from working on these missed issues. I'm kind of tired out from macOS. So,
massive area of Meros. You touched on it before as one of the parts that you was the most proud of. Ristretto. Seems that Ristretto has been committed, merged, and completed.
Last time we talked, it was still in progress.
Right.
Or it was about to be started, actually. I don't think I had started it yet.
Tell me about it. How was it? How did you find it? How much work was it? Are you feeling like you never want to see or hear the word ristretto or anything else vaguely Italian sounding ever again, or is it not that bad?
Well, I already disliked coffee, so until they name a cryptography thing Diet Coke, I'm good on that aspect. Or Diet Pepsi, both are great.
Yeah.
Um, I actually have a can of Diet Pepsi right next to me, so. um, so when it comes to Ristretto, previously we used something called ED25519. And this is also used by Monero. It's used by. Wait, what else is it used by? Like Monero's the prime example. Oh, um, it. Okay, apparently I am very. Oh, it's used by Nano. Nano is the
I was
example
going
I
to say
wanted to say.
Nano, but I didn't want to seem like an idiot. I
Yeah,
was
no,
going to
no.
say Nano.
There's plenty of newer coins which use it because it's a lot faster than SECP 256K1, which is what's been classically used by Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Um, so it's a lot faster, but it has this one aspect called torsion, where the very, very simple aspect of it is for any given point, for any given value on the ED25519 system, there's actually 8 different versions of it due to torsion. And this actually led to an octuple spend in Monero, and I think we did talk about this last time. Um, so what Ristretto does is it actually is over ED25519. So it doesn't throw away ED25519, but it takes those 8 points and it manages to come out with a canonical encoding, a singular form of it. So it's taking ED25519 and all the things that makes it great and removing this problem with it. So because it changes how things are encoded and represented, it isn't compatible. But it still uses the underlying ED25519 curve, and because of that, still keeps a lot of the performance and so on. So what we did is we actually moved to the Dalek, which I brought up earlier, the Dalek implementation of Ristretto inside Meros itself. But for the Python test, I didn't want to just wrap Dalek again because I like having multiple implementations. Like we have our own BLS code because Meros uses this one BLS library called Blast, spelled BLST. But we used to use Milagro. So when Meros upgraded to Blast, I instead wrote Python code to upgrade Milagro. And so that way we actually have both in our code base and we can cross compare. If one has an issue, then the other will be able to tell us. So I actually wrote our own Ristretto code just because there wasn't Python code at the time. And I'm really happy with it, and I do feel like it's deepened my understanding of Ristretto, which is good. So yeah, there's just a lot of great things about it, and it is technically slower, but it's similarly fast, and it's based on the same principles, and it solves the biggest problem. And while I wasn't concerned about an octuple spend in relation to Meros, we don't use ED25519 in any way like that because Monero used it in a very specific way that this could happen in the first place. Um, so while that wasn't a risk with Meros per se, the variable encoding has caused issues in the past with compatibility across libraries, where some libraries will accept some encodings that other libraries don't accept. So when some libraries do accept some encodings and other libraries don't, that means if I wanted to write a Meros node in NIM, which we already have, but if I wanted to take the Python code and expand the Python code to be a proper node, it means some asshole out there, to be honest, could just say, hey, I want to cause chaos. Here's a signature that one group will accept that the other group won't. And because of that, not half the nodes, because not everyone would run a Python node, but some of the nodes on the network would say, why are you guys using an invalid transaction and disconnect? And then the other nodes would be like, it's perfectly valid, the signature passed. So because there are discrepancies between libraries, Ristretto aims to solve that by providing definitive answers to it.
Okay. The next, the next commit that I think that I pulled up is one that, as we were off air before we came on, you didn't
Mhm.
like, and it was, funnily enough, it was the reason why I picked it. It's one of those commits every once in a while that you'll drop in that just proves that you're human, whether or not it's you're talking to your commits or your code base, or in this case, whether you've missed something. It seemed. But number four, oh, not my question. Number four is you've got a commit which is a miscellaneous finishing touches to Ristretto. Um, what happened there, Kayaba? Is it possible? Is it possible? Now, I know they say that apparently somewhere in the world there is a unicorn, and somewhere in the world lightning could strike twice. Is it possible that Kayaba himself may have just missed? something?
There are a few mistakes throughout the Meros code base. Hopefully not actively in it and undocumented. No, of course we have open issues. But no, there are a few such examples of this. But no, when I don't even remember. Let me pull it up real quick. What even I was trying to fix, because when I merged Ristretto, oh, I know the issue. I remember the issue now. When I merged Ristretto, and then the GitHub CI actually ran the test. I think that's what it was. 1 second. Yeah, when GitHub actually ran the test, it said the test was failing. And generally, I run the test on my own. Don't get me wrong, but the GitHub CI runs the test in its own way, and sometimes that leads to differing results. It turns out when I merged Ristretto, I changed the definition of a signature. A signature used to be defined as 64 bytes, flat out. But under the new system, a signature is defined as a variable amount of bytes, which should really not make a difference. Don't get me wrong. Yes, there are differences because of that, but practically we just use that to. It's an internal thing. But my endpoint here was when we have this variable amount of bytes. One of our tests, it doesn't set a signature just because it has no D2. It doesn't actually check the validity of signatures. It's testing other aspects of transactions. And because of that, when it actually wrote a transaction to the database, it saved a signature that was 0 bytes long. And then when a test tried to read it back from the database, it would say, hey, this isn't a valid transaction you saved. It's missing its signature. So in the previous system, because it was guaranteed to be 64 bytes, it would just write 00000, so on. But in this new system, it wrote nothing. And that was the issue there. So the solution was just in that test to ensure that 64 bytes were written out, just to ensure that a signature was present, even if it wasn't a valid signature. And we also could have generated a valid signature. There just wasn't any to. So I documented that, and then I had a few variables left over named ED, standing for ED25519, and I renamed those variables to Ristretto. So one of them was an error I missed, and then some of it was just more of a generic cleanup.
Yeah, that's nowhere near as bad as I'd hoped. So yeah,
I did say finishing touches, not critical vulnerability fix.
I think it's like we'd come hoping for some sort of drama, and it turned out not to be much. Okay, fair enough.
Shame on you, Cryptosi.
Yes, I know. Don't worry, there'll be another day. Another question for you, which was another commit, which was to add Rust as a dependency.
Yes, part
I
of the
guess
same project, actually.
yes. I guess you could. I guess that's not really. Well, give us a short description of why Rust needs to be a dependency.
So Ristretto used the Dalek library for ED25 or Dalek library to handle Ristretto. And because of that, we needed to have Rust as a dependency because Dalek was written in Rust. And generally, I wouldn't do that. I would have looked for a C library, and there was one C library out there known as Libsodium. Libsodium is actually a very expansive cryptography library, has a lot of functionality, but it did not have it didn't have the Ristretto functionality it didn't have the functionality we wanted, because a lot of people using Ristretto, for some reason, they don't use it. When these libraries implement Ristretto, they don't implement signatures. So they'll have Ristretto, which is a valid elliptic curve, but they won't have signatures. You can't sign a transaction with it because there's no signature scheme defined. And that still makes it usable for something in like Monero, which doesn't have traditional signatures. That said, we needed to write our own signature function because of that, which we have. In Libsodium just did not play nicely with that idea when I read over it, of doing such low-level operations on your own. I could have been wrong, but it was also just a very expansive project, and I didn't want to include the bloat of Libsodium into the Meros release. So instead, I went with the Dalek library just because it is the top Ristretto library. And by the top, I do mean the top. I'm pretty sure the authors of Ristretto and the authors of Dalek are the same. So Rust was added a dependency on that basis, but also because the GUI, which has also had some work done, I wanted to move to a different GUI backend. Right now previously we used something called WebView, and I wanted to move to something called Rye, which has WRY, which has a lot of the same ideology, yet is a more modern version, and is also in Rust, which is not something I enjoyed because it made it harder to work with, but it is another reason to have Rust as part of the dependencies. And I'm not entirely happy with it just because it's yet another dependency and it makes Meros need a lot of languages to fully be developed. You need
That
NIM, of
was
course. You need C and C++, which is a dependency. We have tests written in Python. When we go to actually check on the Python test, because we type check Python. Python by default, it doesn't have types. You can say x equals 5, which is an integer, and then you can say x equals ABC, which is a string of characters. And Python's like, cool. We don't do that. We do specify this should be a number, keep it as a number. And to accomplish this, we have something called a type checker, which goes ahead before we run any Python code. And it's like, okay, yep, this makes sense. You're assigning x to 5, and x is supposed to be a number. The type checker we use is actually written in Node.js. So that is another dependency, Node.js. And then our GUI, it's built with Node.js. So we're up to Node.js, Python, NIM, and now Rust. And then, of course, C and C++. Actually, I'm not sure we have C++ code anymore. We might not have C++ code, but we do have at least C and I think potentially some assembly. But really, when we're discussing Meros as a project, it's NIM, Rust, Python, and Node.js.
Yeah, that's still quite a few languages.
That is quite a few. I would have preferred it to be NIM and Python. But I understand why the others exist, and they all have a place in this mesh of an ecosystem. So they all have a place. They're all beneficial. If you're downloading a binary, it won't matter to you. But as a developer, they each offer great advantages, and you should only have to deal with them the first time you set them up. So I'm not entirely happy with it, but it was deemed worth it.
Good segue into our next portion when you said not entirely happy with. I would guess something that you're also not entirely happy with is the number of new issues that have cropped up into the Meros code base.
I don't really mind issues. It's always best that they come up now. And some of it is me just writing out thoughts that I've had in advance, but I never actually wrote down. And then, because we've talked about this before about using issues like post-it notes and just for record keeping, so not all of it is anything too crazy or insane or detrimental.
Right, but these ones were so there was quite a few new ones, and yeah, some of them will be, but some of them were critical and protocol issues.
We did have 2 new critical issues.
We will get to those. There was also a few protocol ones as well, which we discussed before and said protocol issues are kind of critical anyway. Sometimes maybe these ones aren't. We're going
They
to get
do
onto them
frequently
though.
overlap with,
Yes.
but they're not on their own.
Right. So this one,
They're
which I'm going to
arguably
ask.
critical before launch on the pure premise that it becomes much harder to change the protocol after launch because there are people running our protocol. But
I guess, yeah, the definition of critical then does come into question. But anyway, that's, I guess, another question for another podcast.
oh, we have
This
time.
this question, well, we don't. We're almost halfway through our podcast already, and we are barely
I thought you
halfway
said we
through
were
the
doing a
question.
3-hour special episode for the
We
third
are
anniversary.
we are not doing a 3 hour special episode
Okay,
for
well,
the
I have now just
first.
promised that to our loyal audience, Cryptosi. Are you going to disappoint them?
Going to disappoint them. I'm sorry. They don't want 3 hours of me sniffling and snooting down the phone. This
I can talk for
particular,
3 hours.
you could. Shall we say what is it that you don't like about cryptocurrencies? Well, anyway, no, that's not a question. Don't start.
It sounded okay. Moving on back to subject though.
Yes, and this particular one isn't even a critical issue, right? This is just
Mhm.
one that I liked because it had a lot of discussion. It's issue number 312, platform support branch. Tell me about this issue, which I don't even know if I think if I was the developer and you'd have come through and you'd have called this an issue, I may have said I don't actually think this is an issue. So first of all, tell us why you think it's an issue, why you believe it should be uh, been added to the code base as an issue, and then explain to us what it actually is all
So
about.
the platform support branch, I actually touched on it earlier. It's meant to be a branch to add macOS and Windows support, along with support for any other operating systems we want to target. One thing that was noted is that 2014 versions of Ubuntu, which are actually still widely used, and they are still supported. The 2014 release in question, 14.04, is a long-term support release, and I think it's supported till 2024, 2026 on that premise officially. So it actually is something I would want to consider supporting. But that failed to compile Meros, so that's something I want to look into. But notably was Mac OS and Windows support. So that was actually where we did the Mac OS support development. I think we had a lot of commits that each changed like one or two lines or very few aspects. And um, when that part of it was ready, the platform support branch was merged as Mac OS support. It wasn't merged as platform support in general because we still don't have Windows and we still don't have other aspects. But that's really where I'm doing development on supporting these other environments.
Yes, on that particular issue, you've got a slightly different layout to what you've got with the others. Whereas on this one, you've got like a checklist, and it seems like you're going through each of the pieces on the checklist and knocking them off one by one. Have you used this type of checklist on issues before, and I've just not picked it up? If
Uh,
not, how have you found working this way? Has it been helpful to you?
One other issue I know of which has it is the untested features issue. Like we just have I have a list of tests that need to be done but currently aren't done, and that also uses a checklist for the list of tests that should be done and aren't. It's it's pretty efficient because you just look at the top of it and you see everything you have to do. You don't have to look through every single comment and see what every individual pointed out. And it's something I want to use a bit more with these larger branches or larger issues. And by larger, I don't necessarily mean by severity, I just mean by scope. Because I think with macOS, we had over 10 items, 11 items of nitpicks that needed to be fixed.
Yeah. This one is a critical issue. I don't think it's going to take you very long to describe it, as the title of this issue pretty much says it all. Issue number 311. The GUI handles the same action multiple times. What does that mean, and why is that a problem?
So the GUI handles the same action multiple times. Means exactly that. You were right. One, excuse me. For the very basic GUI we have now, which we've talked about before, and it's extremely basic, and it's not actually meant to be a GUI, versus more just test out the fact we can create a GUI. Um, it sorry, just lost my train of thought. The GUI, it has a button to create data transactions. That's the one thing this thing does. Well, it also offers a button to quit, but that's the second thing it does. You can create data transactions, you can quit. It doesn't support anything else. um, but what I noticed is when I was creating a data transaction to test things out, it was actually creating multiple data transactions. When I clicked create transaction, it was actually firing multiple times. And it's that firing multiple times that creates a risk. It is something that it definitely should not do. So the fixes on the GUI end, just instead of using the on-click event, which apparently can get fired multiple times, is to use something called on-mouse up, which is when you actually release the click. And that alone has its own issues. If you've noticed, like if you click on something but then drag your mouse away and let go, how most GUIs don't actually trigger it as a click.
Mhm.
That's because it's using on mouse up, but it also doesn't trigger on the thing that you move over to.
Ah,
And I'm not sure if it would in that. I'm not sure if Meros would if we just use on mouse up. So it's something I'm still looking into, but it's labeled critical just because technically there's a risk you create multiple transactions, which is something you should never do.
yeah. Yeah.
But it's pretty minor. So
These next
mm.
couple are all about merit. Merit is probably, uh, I guess you didn't say it as one of the most your most proud coding moments within the Meros base code base. But I think Merit is probably one of the biggest uh, deals in how you've handled transactions and not
Mhm.
transactions, sorry, or consensus.
It's the
Let's
core
say
premise of our consensus mechanism and what really
exactly.
sets Meros apart.
Yeah, I really do think that probably should have been up there with ASMR, but you neglected it. But don't worry, I don't think Merit's gonna hold it against you.
Well, good for
Partial
that.
partial merit removals make no sense. I love it when you insult your own coding and you do something and you turn around and you're like, hi, but why have you done that? You idiot. Issue number
I was actually
317.
texting a friend, you know what? I hate this code and I hate whoever wrote it, knowing full well I was the person who wrote it at the time.
Okay, so partial merit removals make no sense. Why do they make no sense? Oh, another thing is, I always say this, but for those of you who aren't usually guests on our podcast, if you check the show notes down below, you'll see links to the description. The one thing I really did like about this is that as I'm doing the research for the podcast, I'll generally read the documentation around issues, and this one had such a great description of why merit removals make no sense. I really didn't have to ask you the question, but no one else has read it, so I just wanted to say that was a really good description that you gave. So please, yeah,
Yep.
go ahead.
So partial merit removals, it's not actually about how much merit it removes. It's not saying, oh, you only lose some of your merit. It's actually, um, so to be clear, a merit removal is a effect. If some merit holder out there, someone with merit who's voting on transactions, let's say they decide to be malicious and they vote on two different transactions at the same time and they compete with each other. This is known as being malicious, trying to double spend. And we create a merit removal which says, hey, here are two verifications for competing transactions signed by the same person. On that premise, this person is malicious. They should not be participating in the network. Let's remove their merit. And there is a case where we have a partial merit removal, where it still removes all their merit, as I said. But the distinction is that the first thing, so say the first verification for a bad transaction, um, that has already been archived on the Meros blockchain. So because it's already been archived, we are no longer expected to have a signature for it. We just say, hey, the signature's over here. It's on the blockchain. You already have it. We don't need to send it again. And because of that, here's the second part of it. And the second part has the signature. So partial just means whether or not it includes both signatures or only one signature because the second signature has already been archived. And honestly, it just doesn't make sense. It sends both elements, or both votes verifications, but the first one's already been archived on the blockchain. So therefore, if you are going to handle this, you already have it. So there's no need to send it around again. So there's just no reason to send it. And that's why it doesn't make sense. It's basically saying if the first one's already archived, we don't need to repeat ourselves. And it's just about simplifying that aspect out because right now, as an independent message, it doesn't have value. And it's also something I really want to make sure to get done before mainnet because one of the things I care about is protocol complexity. How difficult is it to implement? How difficult is it to rewrite? How difficult is it to work with? And it's really great to keep all of that to a minimum. And this is just extraneous. It complicates things without having a reason to. Um, and this is still going to have to be tracked somewhat from a node perspective. We just don't need a network message for it and duplicate code. So it's something I want to make sure gets done by mainnet just to make it easier to work with Meros as a whole.
A little bit earlier in the podcast, we did say about things that were a protocol issue and not a
Mm-hmm.
critical issue. And I guess this precisely explains how something can be a both protocol yet not critical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is well, there probably were others, but this is the first time I've seen one that has been a protocol issue, but not a critical issue. Um, Malicious merit holders. This is also a protocol issue which was not marked critical, but I don't know if this one should have been. Malicious merit holders shouldn't be able to regain merit.
Mm-hmm.
Issue number 316. On the sounds of it, it does sound like this is a critical issue. But I'm not a developer, so please do take the time to explain to us what this issue means, and is it
So,
critical or not?
so merit holders, let's say we have a merit holder, they're indexed from 0 onward. So let's say we have merit holder 0, and they decide to be malicious, whether on purpose or by accident. Just running 2 instances of a node with a merit holder is enough to get you flagged as malicious, just because if you see 2 different transactions because someone's trying to double spend, not you, your nodes won't coordinate and they'll say, oh, this is a vote, let me vote, like this is a new transaction, let me vote on it. And that can create conflicting votes, which is considered malicious. So it is possible to accidentally be malicious, and I don't mean to say otherwise. But if you lose your merit for being malicious, you can regain it. You can then mine another block and still gain the merit from it. And that creates complexity because now we have this state of historically removed but now funded. And we can't just say, hey, did this person ever have a merit removal? We have to say, hey, did this person have a merit removal in effect at this specific block? And it's that aspect in which things get tricky. So, so basically what I want to do is I want to simplify the protocol, make it simpler to develop and work with, and just say, no, if you ever lose your merit, you permanently lose it. It's not a question of did you have it at this block, it's just did you have one.
Do you think this makes the network slightly more secure and slightly less vulnerable to attacks of?
Considering you can just generate a new key and mine to that, it technically does make it more secure because brand new merit holders have to actually mine a bit more in order to earn their first merit. This is to stop using multiple keys for your merit, which is what happens when you sorry, I'm running this all through my head. If you want to be malicious, say you have like 200 merit, but you only need 100 to be a bad person.
Yeah.
Right, there's an attack where you use 2 keys, each with 100 merit, and you only are malicious with 1. So to disincentivize this, the first block you mine, it actually has a higher difficulty to limit the effectiveness of using multiple merit holder keys to try to work around this. Right now, the difficulty is set to be 10% harder, but I think I might want to make that 15% or so. So, yeah, so right now it is. So because of that, if you do generate a new key and mine to that instead, it will actually, I'm not sure if it will be harder or not, because if it may, no, it will be harder. It will be harder. Sorry, I was running it through my head. If you have 0 merit, will it still count you as new? So because of that, it will technically be harder, but it's easy to generate a new key, and anyone with a lot of resources could probably add an additional 10%. So technically, yes, it's harder, but it's not, it alone is not something I would call a security mechanism.
Okay.
Versus just something done for simplicity and ease.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Thank you for clarifying that. Um, Final issue. This one is a great one. So it seems I've saved the best till last. This is issue 315. Blockchain tests fail with seed, and there's a long string number there. Could you explain this to me? Why is the seed part so specific? When I first looked at this question, I assumed, well, I literally stopped reading that when it said seed. I didn't even look at what the seed was. So why is it so specific, this particular issue?
So the seed we use are actually timestamps. So in this case, it was 1,622,256,150 seconds since the epoch. The epoch being January 1st, 1970. So it's actually a timestamp. It's a number of seconds since 1970, or since the start of 1970. And when we run test suites, when we run our test suite, we actually randomize a lot of data on the NIM side. The Python side, I don't think any data is randomized at any point. It were very consistent over there. But on the NIM side, we actually randomly create data with the intent of generating random data. So if there is this edge case, this one thing that should work yet doesn't work, we randomly generate enough data where that case will be tricked. We test all execution paths by just trying every single arrangement of data. And it's via a process called fuzzing. So this is actually a very fuzzy test suite. It generates a lot of random data to test a lot of things. And this seed is for a specific timestamp, and it generated random data in such a way that the test failed. And I am still looking into why. I have some ideas, but I'm still looking into it. And I thought I had a fix. It did not work. It created more issues than it fixed. I had to revert that. But I actually did find another seed demonstrating it. So there are other seeds out there. It's not like I ran a billion instances of this code. It's just that was the timestamp at which it first popped up. And it's actually thanks to using GitHub. We have a GitHub action to run the test every time a new commit appears. And that's actually what found that in this case, which is something I'm happy about. And it's pretty rare. With when I tried to replicate it, I had to run the code 75 times to find it. So for all I know, it happens, once out of 150 times, or once out of 75 times, or once out of 38 times, and I just got unlucky. But it's exceedingly rare because I would have assumed that this test was rock solid, having worked for months before just failing now. And that's the importance of generating this random data as we do.
I have a laissez-faire attitude towards most things. So if I run a test and it passes 75 times and then fails on the 76th time, I'd probably just ignore it and carry on. Why can you not do that in this case?
Shame on you, Cryptosi. Shame on you.
I'm just saying what everybody else is thinking.
Cryptocurrencies can never fail. In this case, when a reorganization happened, someone who has supposed to have 0 merit actually had 1 merit. And the problem with having 1 merit is that the concern is if you reorg enough times and you consistently gain 1 merit you shouldn't have, you can actually print merit and get merit for nothing, and therefore vote and confirm transactions when you should not be able to. So I actually, turning this into an attack would be a very complicated process. You would have to know exactly how it happens. You would have to create multiple blocks. You would have to trigger reorgs, which requires actually mining those blocks. And if you're actually mining the blocks, that also would give you 1 merit. So that would potentially be more effective. Like, there may be no value in going to this end. So I'm not saying exploitable, but I'm saying there's something wrong, and that is a valid concern, because we are discussing transactions being confirmed and someone having merit when they shouldn't, and then being able to vote with it. And that can tip the scales when done at scale. So really, Meros can just never fail, and it's something that I've taken a lot of time and consideration into making sure that Meros is always accurate, not only to its internals, but to the protocol definitions we have and to the expected use. So it really just can never fail. To see any failure like this is unacceptable. And there actually are a couple of other tests which randomly fail and I've yet to work on. But those aren't as critical as this, in my opinion.
It's amazing that it's really good actually that you don't share my laissez-faire attitude, because
Yeah, definitely on
anybody,
that one.
yes, anybody thinking about buying Cryptosi coin, just don't. Okay, it's a bad idea. Finally, the questions that I always ask you. Um, it seems after you've had this pretty momentous month, it's been one of the busiest months of the year, certainly, which is pretty good in the middle of a bull market that you're finding this amount of time, pulling yourself away from Dogecoin and Shiba Inus and all those great things. Um, when testing it, how much how much more do you feel we have to do?
So the two big features left are the epochs redo and checkpoints. And I've actually started on the epochs redo. I'm hoping for that to take me 2 weeks or so. And after that, it would be checkpoints, which I would hope would take me another 2 weeks or so. So all goes well. Next month, we will be able to start scheduling a test net, or at least me saying, here's the issues I have to fix before the next test net. But I would honestly still expect us to be 2 months out or so.
Awesome, awesome. Kayaba, I'm not even going to ask you when mainnet, because if anybody doesn't know by now, they've obviously missed enough episodes, and they need to know how to work that out. If you are a person who's watching for the first time, please do not be shy. Just go back to the episode before this, and the episode before that, and the episode before that, because I literally always ask Kayaba the same
Except you're not
two
asking me
questions.
this time.
No, I'm not going to ask you this time. I'm not going
Shame
to.
on you, Cryptosi.
Yeah, my journalistic integrity has been cast into question. Um, Thank you for devoting your time, for donating your time, for being such a splendid guest as
Happy
always.
to do it.
Oh, it's excellent the way you explain all these things. I really appreciate it. I hope all the people watching are appreciating and listening, obviously. Please like, subscribe, and share, and all of that good stuff. I always say that at the end. Next time, I'm going to say it at the beginning because we need to get more likes and more shares. So next time, I'm going to say it at the beginning. Something that my son's YouTubers seem to always say: "Hello, like this video, subscribe, and share." So I'm going to do that at the beginning next time. Hopefully next month we will be discussing when testnet with some more clarity. If not, there's no pressure on that. Obviously, as we've always said, when it's
I
ready.
feel pressured.
Well, yeah, well, Lido, so there's no pressure from me on that. So yeah. So what I really want to say
Mhm.
was thank you. Anybody who's interested, please join the Meros Discord if you want to ask any questions that I can put forward to Cryptosi, to Kayaba in the next. There's no point asking me the questions, honestly. To Kayaba in the next episode. I didn't do any this month because there was just so much to get through in the GitHub. So anybody who has posted questions, I apologize. I will endeavor to put them into the next episode. Kayaba, before I let you go, is there anything you wish to speak about or share?
Nothing off the top of my head, but thanks for the opportunity. It's always been, as always, it's been great to be here, and I really appreciate it. So thank you.
Was there a vacancy you was considering? Have you yeah, go ahead.
Yes, but that may be filled. It's complicated, so I'm gonna wait before putting another job ad out there.
Okay. Right. Well, like I said, thank you so much for donating your time. It's been another amazing episode. I feel great about things. I hope you do too.
Thank
And
you.
hopefully we shall reconvene next month for the July episode. But this has been the June
Mhm.
episode. Thank you very much, Kayaba, and goodbye.
Happy to do it. Thank you.